Samuel Little, also known as Samuel McDowell, was an American serial killer who was convicted of killing 3 women in California in the late 1980s. However, he later confessed to killing 93 people, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Little was born in 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, and had a difficult childhood. He was raised by his grandparents and had a history of behavioral problems. He was arrested for the first time at the age of 14 for breaking and entering. He went on to have a long criminal record, including charges of theft, assault, and drug offenses. In the 1980s, Little began a killing spree that lasted for over a decade. He targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were involved in the sex trade or had substance abuse problems. He would lure them in by offering them drugs or money, and then strangle them. He often moved around the country, making it difficult for authorities to connect the murders. In 2012, Little was arrested in Kentucky on a drug charge and was later linked to 3 murders in California through DNA evidence. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. However, it wasn't until 2018 that Little began confessing to the dozens of other murders he had committed. He provided detailed information about the victims and their deaths, and authorities have been able to confirm many of his confessions. Little died in December 2020 in prison at the age of 80. He had been serving multiple life sentences for his crimes. It is important to note that Little's victims were mostly marginalized women, and their murders went unsolved for years, highlighting the systemic failure of the justice system to properly investigate and solve crimes against marginalized communities. It should also be noted that Little's confession have yet to be confirmed by the authorities, and they are still investigating the killings, and some have yet to be confirmed. One of the unique aspects of Little's case is the way in which he was eventually caught. In 2012, the LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division's Cold Case Homicide Unit was going through their unsolved cases and stumbled upon Little's DNA in the national database. He had been arrested in Kentucky for possession of drugs, and his DNA was entered into the system as part of that arrest. The LAPD were able to match Little's DNA to samples found at the scenes of 3 unsolved murders from the 1980s in Los Angeles. Little was extradited to California to face trial for the 3 murders. During his trial, he was described as a manipulative and cunning individual who preyed on vulnerable women. He was found guilty and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. It wasn't until 2018, however, that Little began confessing to the dozens of other murders he had committed. He provided detailed information about the victims and their deaths, and authorities have been able to confirm many of his confessions. Little claimed that he had killed 93 people, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. While Little's confessions have helped bring closure to many families and law enforcement agencies, it's important to note that authorities have yet to confirm all of his claims and that the investigation is ongoing. Little's case also highlighted the lack of attention and resources given to unsolved murders, especially those involving marginalized communities. Many of Little's victims were Black women, and their deaths went unsolved for decades. It's a tragic reminder of the systemic failures of the criminal justice system and the importance of continuing to pursue justice for all victims, regardless of their background. It is also worth noting that Little had a history of drug addiction and mental illness, which may have contributed to his actions, but it does not excuse his crimes. Another important aspect of Little's case is the way in which he was able to evade capture for so long. He often moved around the country and would change his name and appearance to avoid detection. He also targeted vulnerable women who were often not reported missing or whose deaths were not initially considered suspicious. This made it difficult for authorities to connect the murders and for families to get closure. Additionally, many of Little's victims were involved in the sex trade or had substance abuse problems, which made them less likely to be taken seriously by the authorities. This is a common issue in cases involving marginalized communities. and highlights the need for the criminal justice system to take all victims seriously and to allocate resources to solving these types of crimes. Little's case also has implications for the use of DNA evidence in solving cold cases. The LAPD's Cold Case Homicide Unit was able to match Little's DNA to samples found at the scenes of 3 murders from the 1980s, which led to his arrest and conviction. This demonstrates the power of DNA technology in solving cold cases and the importance of maintaining and updating DNA databases. It is also worth noting that Little's case has led to a renewed focus on unsolved murders, and many law enforcement agencies around the country have been reviewing their own cold cases in the wake of his confessions. This has led to new leads and possible closures for families who have been searching for answers for decades. In conclusion, Sam Little's case is a chilling reminder of the devastation that can be caused by a serial killer and the systemic failures of the criminal justice system to properly investigate and solve crimes against marginalized communities. However, it also shows the power of DNA technology and the importance of continuing to pursue justice for all victims, regardless of their background.